Hi, everyone. Welcome to the ADHD Toolbox. We have got a super episode for you today. Many of you have heard of neurofeedback and maybe don't know what it is. Today, we are going to unpack that. You are going to learn exactly what that is and how it could even replace medication in some cases. Our guest today is Siegfried Othmer. Siegfried, welcome to our show.
Happy to be here.
And Siegfried is a chief scientist at the EEG Institute in Los Angeles, California, which is organized for the delivery of neurofeedback brain training services and the training of neurofeedback professionals. Dr. Othmer received his PhD in physics at Cornell University in 1970. Along with his wife, he has been active in the development of EEG neurofeedback since 1985, when their son first started having neurofeedback training for his epilepsy. So that's a long time, and he's had a ton of experience that he's going to share with us today. After initial focus on ADHD, their work has increasingly encompassed the more serious childhood afflictions such as autism spectrum, physical and emotional trauma, and developmental delay. And other key focus of the work has been on the anxiety depression spectrum, PTSD, traumatic brain injury, substance dependency, chronic pain, and cognitive decline in the adult population. Siegfried Othmer is the author of two books. The first one is ADD, the 20-Hour Solution, with co-author of Mark Steenberg, and Brian's Legacy, the story of their own son who is struggling with epilepsy. So, Siegfried, thank you so much for being on our show today.
Yeah, delighted to be here.
Well, we have tons to talk about because ADHD is something that people are trying to, they struggle with because the behavior and the learning challenges, and they're getting calls from their school. They don't know what to do. The doctor's telling them to be on medication. Some parents say, I don't want my child to be on medication, and they're looking for solutions. Is neurofeedback a solution to that?
Yes, and the demonstration of that has been pretty clear. It turns out that neurofeedback got its big boost around the issue of ADHD initially, and that did happen around the late 80s and early 90s. The research went all the way back to the 70s. The thing is this, neurofeedback got started around epilepsy. The research was done in animals and so forth. And so it had a very solid start. But biofeedback therapists, and neurofeedback is sort of part of the biofeedback field, biofeedback therapists were scared of epilepsy because that's the neurologist's turf. They didn't want to touch it.
Right,
but
right.
ADHD was more in their ballpark. So ADHD became the growth vehicle for the neurofeedback practitioner community. And that's where the literature supported it. So that's where we got involved. So even though we personally got involved through our own son's epilepsy, what we then did as soon as we got into the practice of neurofeedback a few years later, we mainly focused on ADHD. And we're now seeing the second generation. Those people are now bringing us their children. It says, we benefited, now it's their turn, right? Because there is a genetic component. So, so we've had long experience with this. There's no question that neurofeedback works. But here was the downside. The downside is that we were immediately up against the drug companies, right? So the drug companies, through their academic acolytes, went into a major disinformation campaign against neurofeedback. And they hounded the key researcher in the field, Joel Lubar, and they did everything to badmouth this technique, scare the parents about it, and so forth. So this is the history. So it's been an uphill fight. Now, we do a lot better with the conditions where there is no medical competition, such as traumatic brain injury. They don't have anything, right? So that traumatic brain injury is the other area where the field grew nicely, because there was no competition for patients. They didn't have anything for traumatic brain injury. Right. So those are the two areas where early on the field grew nicely. And by now it's really quite solid. But here's the problem that people need to understand. ADHD, by virtue of the fact that there is a medication, namely stimulants, is being looked at narrowly. So the propaganda is that ADHD is just narrowly defined around the standard problems, you know, impulsivity, inattention, and so forth, hyperactivity. And so what's happened is that ADHD has come to be defined as whatever the stimulants treat, right? And whatever the stimulants don't treat, we don't talk about.
Mm-hmm.
So through the entire 20th century, imagine the word emotions was never connected to ADHD because the stimulants don't touch that, right? So it basically was seen as separate. And the conduct problems, the emotional issues, the oppositionality and conduct issues and so forth that really drive parents nuts and make life difficult they were seen as comorbidities. They were put off into some other bin, but they're part and parcel of this condition. ADHD needs to be looked at more comprehensively. The diagnosis of ADHD is a little bit like a diagnosis of headache. You know, it's not a diagnosis. It's an obvious fact. The child is inattentive and whatever, but it doesn't really tell you what's going on. Mm-hmm. And so parents really need to. Well, they're doing this. They're taking responsibility for their son. They say, I'm not liking what I'm hearing and so forth. And they're absolutely right to do that because they're being led down the garden path with a suggestion that medication is somehow the answer. Now, it is the answer for some children, and it's at least a partial answer for some children. But since that's all that they have in the medical armamentarium, once the doctor has done that, he's done his thing. Medicine is finished. But the parent isn't finished. The problem is bigger than that, by and large. So for us, as we see it, ADHD resolves into two major categories. There's either the simple kind, where it's basically the classic categories, where stimulant medication might very well get the parent out of the bind and the child out of the bind, and life can go on. But then there's a much more complex presentation, which involves what we call dysregulation, more global dysregulation. And that involves then the other symptoms, headaches, stomach aches, sleep problems, immune system issues. It's just a much broader state of dysregulation. But in all of those, the brain is involved. And in all of those situations, if you train the brain, conditions become much better. So, and since the neurofeedback also takes care of the simple form, we now think that the primary remedy for ADHD should be neurofeedback. In other words, we should see it as a dysregulation issue, and improved regulation is the answer. And here's the critical insight. The brain does regulation. For those of us who are blessed with a functional brain, brain regulation is so extremely subtle. There's no way that this can be externally managed. The brain has to manage regulation on its own. It's like a mountain climber. Nobody can climb the mountain for you. You know, you've got to have that skill set, and so there's no external aid that gets the brain to the point where it can function as well as it needs to function. And so in other words, the brain has to have the competence. It doesn't work with an exoskeleton or with a prosthesis or with medication. You can't have a narrow solution for a broad-based problem. And that means the brain needs to be trained in order to solve this problem. It's the categorical remedy for what is basically a problem of regulation.
Got it. Wow, that's a ton of information there, and it sounds like that the executive functioning delays and the learning disabilities that the doctors are diagnosing and trying to treat with medicine can be treated by training the brain.
Indeed. In fact, learning disabilities actually there is no good medical remedy there at all. So learning disabilities are one of these things that is in the picture that is not typically identified. So what's readily labeled by the MD is the ADD portion. But why is that child ADHD? It could be because of traumatic brain injury. There could be an anxiety component. There could be a fundamental disorder of, a dysregulation of arousal regulation, of vigilance, a disorder of vigilance. And there could be learning disabilities, there could be vision problems, all sorts of issues, right? But the MD for whom the remedy is stimulants, the problem narrows down. He sees only that aspect of the problem, delivers the stimulant medication, and then he can, wash his hands of the problem. But we really need to look at this more globally. Why is the particular child inattentive? Why does that problem exist? And now we come to this more global remedy, which is brain training, which directly matches the fundamental issue, which is brain dysregulation. Whether it's learning disabilities or anxiety or vision problems, the brain is involved, right? And the thing is that in neurofeedback, we again started almost in the medical model. That is, we had a formula that we applied to all these children. And so just like with medication, initially 35 years ago, we had a narrow solution, right, for a narrow set of problems.
Right.
And now over the last 34 years that we've been in this field, we have been enabled to take the more global perspective because our tools have gotten stronger. And again, every clinician focuses narrowly on what they can do and sets aside those things they can't do. So our scope has gradually broadened over the years. And so now we are encompassing the entire dimensions of this more global issue of attention deficits, behavioral deficits, the more global problem of brain dysregulation. And that includes then learning disabilities.
Got it. Okay, so let's dig into this so a parent can understand. And let's talk about first, what's the difference between biofeedback and neurofeedback briefly?
Well, biofeedback is just basically giving information back to the brain about some physiological function, and then the brain can act upon that. So traditional biofeedback did this with hand temperature, did this with galvanic skin response, and blood pressure, and heart rate, and muscle tension, and so forth. So those variables. But then, of course, we also discovered this can be done with the brain. And now that enlarges the information space because the EEG is so complex. And so all of a sudden, now we get wade right into the circuitry of the brain. And we show the brain information about its neural dance. And the brain loves it. The brain looks at that information and says, wait a minute, this is my dance, right? Let me improve my dance.
Right.
And that's essentially the story. It's so simple. Right.
Wow. It's like a mirror to your brain.
Oh, absolutely. We're giving the brain a mirror that it has not had. Wow. And the brain says, give it to me. I love this. Right.
And the ADHD brain is so hyperactive, right? In many cases that it just eats it up, I'll bet.
Indeed, because we're now at the brain level. And you see, when the brain is interested, the child can't help but be interested also, right? It sits there and takes it because the brain is in charge, right?
Right.
And if the brain is not bored, if the brain is engaged, we see this with autistic children. Mothers come in and say, I can't believe you're going to do neurofeedback with my child. But then the child is just captured by that image because the brain gets it. The brain says, oh, wait a minute, this is my dance. I'm interested in my dance.
So one of your notes here that I took was that any solution, any remedy must be multifaceted. So are you saying that in addition, when people take on neurofeedback, that there are other remedies they should incorporate at the same time?
Oh, yes. And because the whole ADHD thing is blowing up on us, right? We're seeing much more of an issue than we had 30 years ago. So there are biomedical issues that need to be taken care of, food toxicities, food intolerances, toxicities, and so forth. So all those biomedical issues, yes, the problem is actually the following. If people come to us first and we actually solve their problems so the child is now well behaved and so forth, the parent may actually not bother doing all those other things, which is a mistake. They should do those also. But it is not a mistake to do neurofeedback first, because the first thing is to settle down the family and give the child a decent shot at life. And then you take care of these other things when you're not in a panic. Figure out the food intolerance issues and figure out these other things. But no, life has gotten complex, and we simply cannot ignore the toxicities and so forth, dietary issues.
How about environmental factors? I mean, is too much screen time affecting their brain to where they're...
Oh yeah, that too, all of that, and then there's the Wi-Fi issue. Some people are electromagnetically sensitive,
right.
And so forth. So yeah, the screen time issue. You know, our society, let's face it, is an addictive society, right? It gives us what we can't let go of, right?
Right.
And so we need to be careful of what addictions we sign on to.
Right. You know, people are asking me, well, what's causing all this stuff? And we really don't get into it, but the answer is yes, because they'll say, is it too much screen time, or is it the walkers that they were in, or is it the toxicity in their food or environment, or is it vaccines, or is it Wi-Fi, or all these other things? And the answer is yes, it's all of that stuff. It sounds like it's a combination of all of them.
Yeah, and also parenting has changed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not for the better.
Yeah, I mean, I never have heard when I was growing up a child say, "Hey, I'm going to, you give me a spank and I'm going to call, a child CPS on you," right? And it's like, well, where did that come from, right? And so yeah, so parenting definitely has changed in some ways for the better, in some ways it can be improved. So let's go into some neurofeedback so we can understand, because I understand you have some charts there that show us a little bit about what those are. Can you hold those up and kind of explain what you might see, what the brain would see that they just eat up?
Yeah. So what I'm showing here is the results of a test that we usually do with everybody, and that shows just a sequence of reaction times in a continuous performance test challenge, which is often done with ADHD children.
Okay, we can only see half the screen there, so you'll have to. Okay, so the top one versus the bottom, the bottom graph. Can you explain? Is it the top one or the bottom one that you're explaining?
Both. They're just two successive 4-minute segments of the test. What you see in the bottom graph is these excursions. It's plotted as reaction time. So here you see excursions to long reaction time in 4 events, and one of those also has a commission error. That's this guy here. There's this shouldn't be a hit, but the kid hit the target anyway. There's actually a non-target, and then there are a few omission errors where the kid missed the target entirely that he should have hit. So here is just an illustration of how the brain occasionally goes out to lunch, right? And the child is not in control of that. So this is the kind of thing that we get at with the training. So what you want is for the brain to have the kind of continuity it shows in the top plot, but now with increasing fatigue of taking the test and so forth, these errors start showing up. Now there's no way that the child can, by force of willpower, or because the teacher is talking to them urgently, can do better. This is at the brain level. The child has no control over this. And this is the kind of thing that we simply get at with brain training. Now, the thing is, we have to understand this is a developmental issue. We all start out in life inattentive, impulsive, distractible, and not really inattentive. The infant is very attentive, right? It's just not directed.
Right.
So it's an undirected process, and that's the problem there. It's not a problem with the infant, but it's a problem. It can be a problem later. So we're talking about a whole developmental thrust that takes actually about 20 years of life, And so we do these measurements across the age span. Once we're past the age of 20, we stabilize in our performance, and that tends to hold for the rest of life if we're lucky, if we don't have a head injury or something. We actually hold, we tested this across the age range. We have people in their 90s who are holding their skills in terms of this test. So here I want to show you what happens when we do our kind of neurofeedback, which is infralow frequency neurofeedback.
Before we get into that, can I ask you a question? Because I want to understand that graph, and I want parents to understand it as well. So there was a top, you don't have to hold it up again, but the top chart was kind of almost a straight line, right? Fairly, no spikes. And the bottom one had spikes in that. So what happened in that top one, and then what happened in the bottom one?
The top one, actually, there are little excursions there as well. So basically, you would like for the child to be absolutely uniform in reaction time.
And what does that mean when they're uniform?
That means the brain is optimally regulated.
You mean it's focused, or
well, in a physical reaction, there are a whole bunch of brain operations involved to coordinate that, right? Once the decision is made to respond to a challenge, and then the brain organizes the execution of the motor act, and that sequencing is very complex, and then ends up, we measure an actual reaction time, and it turns out that the variation there is very much an indication of neurological maturity. Right? How consistent is the memory in meeting its challenges from moment to moment? And but then there are also these major excursions where the brain is just basically going offline and not attending to the task that the child is obviously knows he's supposed to attend to. Right?
So the spikes, if you will, I'll use my term. So the spikes are incursions, as you call them, are basically showing you where the child loses focus. Is that right?
Right. So what happens in the child's brain? The task of I must hit the trigger is still in working memory. It's still sitting there in working memory. It hasn't vanished. That's the good news, right? It's just the child. There's a delay in the execution, but the memory is still there. So it's good news, bad news, and actually, this is the good news is that there's reason to hope that the child can normalize that behavior. Now, a reaction time outlier, these long reaction times, are sort of almost omission errors, right? They're not quite omission errors. So omission errors is also a problem, and the child had a few of those. Both in the top and in the bottom graph. So the world is much more unforgiving of omission errors than errors of commission. So they're not as commonplace, and it's more in our interest to get rid of those. We can live with commission errors. All of us make commission errors, and that's okay. That's forgivable. But we really, an adult does not make omission errors, right? The world is unforgiving of omission errors, and the adult really does not make them, by and large. So. So that's where we need to get, and that's the we're moving up the maturity curve, and basically what neurofeedback does is it moves people up the maturity curve, right? And that's what's shown in this next plot. If we're ready for that,
I'm ready.
So here we look at two convenient age ranges, 6 to 10. We don't norm the test below 6 because children under 6 rarely can take the test.
If you could hold that up a little bit higher, there we go. Okay.
So again, the bottom one there shows the age of 6 to 9, which means all children short of their 10th birthday. And what you see is that the median score for the children who come to us for training, this is we're looking here at about 2,600 data points, just for that plot, and the median score, where half are above and half are below, is the age of 6. Now, I had to call it age 6 because I don't have norms for less than 6, but actually they scored worse than the age of 6. So the people coming to us for neurofeedback in the age range of 6 to 10, their median score is an age of 6 or below. Now, what happens after 20 sessions of neurofeedback? They score with a median age of 10. And you can see that, say that is sort of, characteristic of what we do. That is, we've moved their mental age effectively 4 years in terms of commission errors, right? Now, if we look at the age range of 10 to 19, we moved, they actually score below 10, right? They score at the age of 9.
Mm-hmm.
But we move them to a median age of 17.
After just 20 sessions.
After just 20 sessions.
Wow.
Of infra-low frequency neurofeedback.
Right.
And now, if parents were aware of this and knew the implications of this, right?
Yeah.
They would surely want to help their child in this regard. And medication helps this, but it helps these problems, but it doesn't do this, right? Because what you really want is that your brain owns this, that your brain has that capacity, whether you've had swallowed Ritalin or not. You know, you want that brain to have that competence natively, and that's doable. That's obviously the better way to go.
That's remarkable. And so 20 sessions over what period of time would you say a parent would see result?
Well, we typically see people, a couple of times a week, 3 times a week. Ideally, we'd like to see them 3 times a week, but then, people
About
may
7
not be able to.
weeks or
so. Yeah.
Okay. So in an ideal scenario, is any of this covered by insurance from time to time, or?
Well, that part is getting better because the insurance companies are starting to wake up to this.
Mm-hmm.
But the drug companies really do protect their turf, and they have strong relationships with the insurance companies.
Yeah.
So everybody along the way, universities, everybody needs to have a good relationship with the bully on the block, which is the drug companies, right? And that includes the insurance companies.
Right. That's amazing. So you guys do some remarkable work. Is this permanent? Once you make these gains, do they lose it? Do they have to come back and do neurofeedback, checkups or anything, or are these permanent gains?
A couple of things on that score. If there is a fallback after 20 sessions, often these kids go on to 40 sessions because we're dealing with more complex issues. It's not just this test, right? And they're dealing with other issues. But by and large, they should hold their gains. If they do not hold their gains, they either need just a little bit more training, or we need to be looking at other things going on. Why is this child not holding their gains, right? Now you look
diet,
at the biomedical issues and other things, because the brain ought to hold its gains. Once it's learned this skill, life reinforces the skill, right? So why are they losing the skill that they've acquired and are using every day? There's got to be something in the way, and so they should hold on to it. On the other hand, what happens, this is really basically training toward better function, right? We're not targeting the ADHD deficit directly. We're basically saying the neurofeedback gives your brain a better self-regulatory competence, and that has a variety of benefits, but it's all good. We're taking the brain into a functional direction, and therefore, and dysfunction vanishes as a secondary consequence of that. So basically, when we're in this model of just optimum functioning, the question is, where does that stop? And of course, it doesn't stop, right? Mm-hmm. Nobody practices the piano more than the concert pianist. And so actually, those of us who do this work here at our office, we regularly do the training. Of course, we don't have to pay for it. And the opportunity is right here at our fingertips, and we take advantage. So, now we're dealing with aging issues, perhaps. We'd mm-hmm. like to maintain quality of brain function as long as we can. Mm-hmm. The issues change as we go through the years. But for us, it's a brain exercise, right? But looked at in a therapeutic model, basically people do 20, 40 sessions, and then it's bon voyage. It's basically life goes on.
Awesome. So what percentage of time have you seen this work?
Oh, well, that's a problem that solves itself. And here's how it goes. So a person comes in, you know, there's an initial evaluation, the person is characterized and so forth, and they get a sample session and then sign up for the training, the longer term. And then it goes step by step. And we basically see, are we progressing, right? If we're not progressing for some reason, then the process stops. You know, we send the person home. He says, I'm sorry, we can't help you. Now, what has happened over time is that happens less and less. In other words, our skill set, our toolkit is now broad, big enough that we can usually help people. But life is complex. You know, so people may quit for any number of reasons. But basically, we're only motivated to continue if there's progress, demonstrable progress, right? If there isn't demonstrable progress along the way, then basically we cut our losses and save everybody the money. It does not help us to carry on against an obvious situation where we're not helping, right? So there has to be ongoing progress, tangible progress that the person can tell us about, or the process grinds to a halt.
Remarkable. This is great stuff. So if you are looking for solutions that are not drug-based, that are not required, medication may not be required, and you're looking for those solutions first, neurofeedback could very well be a solution for that. And if you have any questions, Siegfried, how would they get a hold of you?
Oh, well, two websites. EEG Info is sort of our general website on our kind of work in for low-frequency neurofeedback. We have thousands of practitioners around the world in about 50 countries. And there's a practitioner list on our European site. And there's an American-oriented practitioner list on the American side, eeginfo.com. But also, we're at the EEG Institute. Do we have a moment for me to show one more slide?
Sure.
Okay. Let me show you this plot. Takes a little explanation. Here we're showing.
You'll have to hold it up just a little higher, though. There you go.
We're showing about 80 cases that are from the bottom end of the distribution. They're all from the bottom 16%. Score-wise, right? Distributed here.
You have to hold it back towards you, and yeah, there you go, right about there. Perfect.
Yeah, rank ordered. They're shown here, rank ordered by starting value. So off to the right, the highest scoring, and off to the left, you see a starting score of 0. And then after 20 training sessions, and we're showing omission error performance here. After training, you look at the top of the graph here, and you see that where the people come up to a score of 100, they're basically at 0 omission errors, where we ought to be functioning, right? In other words, they've done as well as they can. You cannot do better,
right?
And the essential message, as you look through, just survey this entire plot, and you observe that the likelihood of scoring the top score of 0 omission errors, that probability is roughly independent of where you start, right? This is staggering. This is absolutely staggering. This means that a child coming in, testing poorly, we have no predictability, right? We do not know what the potential of that child's brain is. The potential could be of testing perfectly normally after 20 sessions, and this is after 20 sessions, in terms of this critical item of omission errors, right? And you can't look at a child and say, well, there's no hope here, right? Or there's nobody home here. This is really the message that I want to say, tell parents. The world does not yet know what the capability is for the recovery potential of the human brain. We're just at the frontier of this. And my wife and I have been fortunate enough to be at the forefront of this, right, for the last 34 years. Because at the time we started, You couldn't find a neurologist on the planet who would take this seriously, right? And now people are talking about it. So people didn't even believe in brain plasticity when we started, right?
Wow.
Which is foundational to this whole thing. So we were really going against the grain 34 years ago, but now it's beginning to dawn on people what the potential is for brain functional recovery, and it is enormous.
Right.
And that's shown here. And in particular, I want parents to know, you have no idea what the potential of your brain, of your child's brain is, until that brain is trained.
Wow, that's phenomenal. And that's coming from a man who spent his life work going through neurofeedback, finding a solution for his son, and spending the rest of his life dedicated to neurofeedback and discovering cures for everything from ADHD to PTSD. So thank you, Siegfried, for being here with us today. Thank you for showing us and making us aware of this amazing tool. I think a lot of parents are going to go to the eeginfo.com and look up a practitioner and start digging into this, and how this could actually help their child. So,
well, thanks for allowing us to tell the story.
Great, thank you. And thank you all for watching this episode of the ADHD Toolbox. This was a good one, and we will see you on the next episode.